Um, great. Can everybody see a slide from me? I want to make sure I'm actually showing something. So given the talent in this room, I'm amazed at where all of you are already. And I know with some of you being graduates already, you've done capstones, you've done investigative projects. So my concern starting this is just that we don't bore some people to make sure that everybody gets what they need. So what I'd like to do, even though I have some slides, is really do this as a conversation because I think there's a lot of talent in the room looking around, some of whom I saw yesterday at graduation. And I want to make sure that you can help each other too, because some of you have done some advanced, very advanced stuff. So, but let's start with the basics and just talk about how important it is to do background research before you hit the ground in your newsroom. And you've probably heard this from other teachers, but I can't underscore it enough. By this, I just mean you need to look at the publication you're going to be reporting for, start reading the stories throughout it, looking at the projects, seeing what they focus on. Especially, I know one or two of you said that you're going to be covering business for the first time, and you want to start to see, well, what types of subbeats are there within business? And Tom can speak to this, I know too, because he's been a business editor, right, Tom?
Uh, Sort of a business. I was the editor of the paper, so that makes me by de facto a
Yeah.
business editor, I guess.
Y-
But the one thing I'll just add here while I have the floor is that the Daily Record is more of a ground level business reporting entity. So don't think you're going to be expected to walk in and write a Wall Street Journal story your first day on the job. The Daily Record has a local audience that it's trying to serve, a lot of small business um, and startups, technology, that kind of stuff. So there is uh, it, so you should have you shouldn't be too worried about ramping up. And they've also got good editors who can coach you and teach you and show you what the ropes are. But again, it's not business writing at a really advanced level. It's business writing at a local uh, grassroots level.
Yeah, and I would just add on that too, that these folks know who they're getting, right? They know you're interns. They know you're not professionals at a 10-year level. And so they're going to pitch stories or ask you to do stories that are at your level. And some of you might be at a very high level. Some of you might need a little more help. I don't know where you all are, but they're going to know quickly where you are. And good editors will assign you stories that you can handle. So don't get too freaked out about what's going to get thrown your way. But I can't underscore enough just reading up both in your publication and whatever the competitors are. So if you're at the Daily Record, maybe it's the Baltimore Business Journal or the business section of the Baltimore Sun or the Baltimore Banner. But think about who the competitors are too and look at the kinds of stories they're doing. And, are they doing things that your publication might be able to spin something off of? Because a lot of times when you look at the daily stories, they're good as a daily story, a 10, 20-inch story, but oftentimes they raise as many questions as they answer, right? If it's a breaking story, and your job is to think, well, what else could we be doing with this topic? What kind of notes should I be taking to think about what kind of stories I could pitch? The best thing you can do on your first week on the job is to have a few ideas, even if they're not accepted as story ideas. Your editors will be impressed that you come in and, the way you're talking to them, they'll be able to tell if you've been reading the paper and have a few ideas or questions about stories, right? So if you wait for them to pitch everything to you, you might end up doing some stories that you're not that keen on. You want to be doing stories you're excited about. So come in with these stories. When I used to parachute in on a new beat, I'd always not only read up, but look kind of notes, underlining things that some of the top flight reporters were doing on the beat, pulling out names of sources, right? Who are they talking to all the time? Who are they getting the skinny from? Um, Making lists of things that I'm seeing in the story. So really it's like reading something for school where you're taking notes take notes on some of these stories so that you can get a sense of who's being featured in them, what kind of topics they're missing, and who you might be able to use for sources. Look for the end up stuff too, because even those stories might have room for additional stories that you could spin off. So impress them with your knowledge of some of the stories they've been doing and your ideas for stories that might come out of that. Don't forget the national or the Maryland stories, even if you're at a more local publication, because I know you've heard the term in your classes, but the local angle from national stories can become very good stories. So think about, well, what do all these protests at these college campuses regarding the Gaza funding that we've given to Israel for the war there, what does that mean to my community? Are there problems here? Has there a problem with police overtime? Have there been problems with university officials? So think about the local angles to some of these bigger stories too, and not just the hyper local stories within your community. Yeah. I learned very early on that the more things I can come up with, and not just the breaking stories, but always having a couple of lists going. We used to have a fabulous teacher at Maryland, a guy named Gene Roberts, who had been an editor not only at the Philly Inquirer, where he won like 17, the paper won 17 Pulitzers while he was editor. He also was a reporter and editor at the New York Times. And I would have him come into my kind of capstone reporting classes and talk about what he did when he parachuted in. He covered civil rights in the South. He covered a lot of great stories. But he had something that he called the 2-notebook plan, which to you might be a notebook and a phone at this point, because you've got a lot more digital equipment than he had back in the 60s or 70s. But his point was, no matter what you're covering, always think about if you're thrown out to do a little daily story, think about the bigger project you could start covering while you're there. So I don't think any of you would have heard this story. Hopefully not. The story, like I still remember this, and this has probably been 20 years since I heard him say this. So when he was a really young reporter working down in North Carolina initially, he was asked by his editor to go talk to a farmer who had like a giant vegetable that was going to be shown at the fair. And you can imagine his reaction to the assignment, like, really? Is it just a picture, or are we writing a story about this too? But they really did want a story and a photo. So he went out to talk to the farmer about the giant vegetable for the fair. And, it started a conversation along with asking questions for that story. And as he talked to him, the farmer started talking about how worried he was about all the development that was encroaching around in the community. And that there were developers coming in trying to buy up property and farms, and the farms were going away. And so he used to keep 2 notebooks. I would say you can probably have it all in one notebook, but he would put some quotes for the longer story in one notebook and the quick daily in the other. But the point is, he was starting to pull a thread on the bigger story while he was doing the short story. And every good reporter that advances quickly that I've known does this, where they spin out. You're like, well, how do you have the time to do these projects? And when you're at early jobs, they're not going to carve out a month for you to work on a project and just do that. You're going to need to be doing the little stories and thinking about the big stories. So if every time you go out, you ask additional questions and you get, curious and nosy about things going on in the community, you might find ideas that you can gradually start chipping away at to make this bigger story happen in a few weeks. Those of you who have done this, anybody want to jump in on this, on how you did this in your own reporting so far? Anybody?
Well, actually, we have Melody Simmons and Ann Lordo who have decades of reporting experience here too. So Ann and Melody, do not be shy if you're listening along to jump in and provide your own expertise.
I can say that, hi guys, I'm sorry I was late. I had a conflict this morning. But basically I have been reporting on Harbor Place here in Baltimore. And that is a long-term story, but also a daily story. So this has been going on for quite some time. And I did a big 6-month investigation of actually what went wrong, looking at financials, looking at CMBS reports. Of course, the property was in receivership. And so there was a lot of reporting that had to be done long-term that required pulling documents, leases, going back almost 40 years, and just trying to retrace and reconstruct that whole development itself, which of course, is a centerpiece in the city of Baltimore, but struggling. And what went wrong? What happened? How did it fall into receivership? In the meantime, we were kicking out daily stories and monthly stories from receiver reports. So this was something that had to be done. You kind of carve out a portion of your day and your week to do that kind of long-term reporting. And you really have to work off of a list. You have to have a good file, and you have to be super organized just to be able to pivot a little bit to get that long-term reporting done as you're doing the daily. So I'll say that definitely.
And I
And
love I love what you said about being super organized, because if you have your phone and you're getting audio on the interview along with taking some notes, and make sure you get if you use something and get a transcript out of it right away so you can hang on to those notes for the longer story. It's really important to keep them organized, to date them, to know who you talk to. Make sure you put the names at the top and spell the names right, because you're going to end up with a lot of interviews probably for that bigger story, and you want to remember who and when you talk to that person. That was the first thing I always made sure I had going in a file.
I would just piggyback just quickly on Melody's comment. I remember covering a big fire on the block. The block in Baltimore was the red light district. And that was a daily story that we covered then. Then I covered the trial of the guy who was charged with arson. And so I was filing daily stories, but what the trial provided was a window into a whole sort of community that most people knew nothing really about. And so even though I was covering that trial like every day, at the end of the day or at the end of the week, I really had this portrait of a community and the way people lived and worked that most of us didn't know anything about. And so I would encourage you, not only are you thinking of the bigger story, but in the daily work that you may do, what is it telling you about a particular community? What is it offering you about the way people work, so that there's layers on how you can report a story, and that story stays with me till today.
Yeah, that's a terrific example. Thank you so much, Anne.
Christine, I want to just piggyback on
Yeah.
that, because what Anne said, and Anne and I worked together for so many years. I have such great respect for her and her work. But sourcing, she mentioned sourcing, and this is so important because when you're mining the field, and I use that term as like you're out there every day, you're meeting people, you're talking to people, but everybody is a potential source. And so it's really important to connect as much as you can. Get a cell phone number right up top, get an email address, put that on a list somewhere, because you're going to go back to that. And you're also, just by talking to people and gathering sources, you're also going to really learn more than you ever knew. And it's just a deep dive. And so this is important as a reporter, to keep your radar up. And just think about everybody as people like a pie, and you want a slice of a pie. And so everybody that can bring something to the table is a potential source. And it's going to give you some more information that you can go after. So be open to that.
Yeah, so that's great. So that segues into two other points. So even before you start, I think at least one of you said you're starting in the beginning of June. Make sure you get there. You're not just looking online at the publication, but you go and drive around and walk around. Do some observations. What are you seeing in the downtown area? What are you seeing in the community? Are there a lot of boarded up homes? the realtors and Chamber of Commerce folks might be able to talk to you about that. Why, what's happened. If there are a lot of empty homes, what does that mean for the market? Are there homes available to sell or not? Are shops empty? I know even in DC, when I go downtown, places are a lot emptier than they used to be pre-COVID. Are office buildings open, shops open, empty? What is that doing to the economy in the area? So hang out, walk around, look around. I used to like to just go sit and get a Coke or a snack or something in some little shop where some people are hanging out. And I would just sit and listen to people talk, which sounds snoopy, but you can learn a lot just by kind of listening. I think I'm a reporter because I am curious about people, and probably all of you are. But, hear the conversations. What are people worried about? What are they saying? Really try to get a feel for it before you get plunged into doing the first couple of daily stories. See where the hangouts are. Where do people go for fun? And start chatting people up. I think, Anne, you mentioned, starting to get the phone numbers and the names and the titles. I strongly recommend that do. And probably some of you did this in your capstone already or in Journalism 320, but do it again, right? Start a Google sheet or an Excel sheet. We required a lot of categories in some of our classes. So I'd say names and titles, cell numbers, email addresses. What's their Twitter or X handle? Do they have a LinkedIn site? I always have an other category for when you talk to them early on, you introduce yourself, you get a little bit of information about them. Do they have kids who they coach in the evenings? Is their wife sick? Jot that down into the other category, because it'll help you when you talk to them again. If you can say again, well, how's your wife Anne doing? Right? It makes them more comfortable. You might think about, this sounds a little weird, but we've been doing this in one of our beat reporting classes where we try to get students to jot down demographics on the sources that they're interacting with. Because if you have a sense of who's in your community and you look at your source list, let's say your community is a very mixed community with people of a lot of different backgrounds, and your sources are all middle-aged white guys, there's a problem there, right? You need to start going places where you're going to meet other people who are representative of the community. So starting with this list, keeping this list going, you might be lucky and somebody in the newsroom already has something that you can share with them, but you might have to start from scratch. So get on it early, because you'll come away with a lot of folks that you'll be able to contact if you get going on this. I'm just going to pull down here a little bit. All right, so you've done some walking around. You gotta do more than just text. And I know we're all used to doing quick texts anymore, but you gotta introduce yourself on the phone and introduce yourself on social media. Have any of you done this when you've started a new beat, where you go on to X or you go on to another site and you say, hey, I'm Chris Harvey, I'm new to this beat. Here's my handle. You can DM me. I'm interested in covering X, Y, and Z. I see a lot of new reporters doing that with great success, and I urge you to try it. Introduce yourself through, are you all active on some social media sites? What are you using, guys? Angel, where are you active for stuff?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of reaching out to my sources, I primarily use Twitter X. It's kind of off and on, like spotty, but I've had success in reaching out to people through DMs and LinkedIn as well.
Yeah, that can be. I've got all my former students. I'm not creepy and following folks while they're students, but once you graduate, I like to keep connected, especially with students that I ran Capitol News Service for 15 years. And yeah, those are valuable, good connections, many of whom remain friends for decades. But it's amazing the connections you can get and the networks you can get just by leveraging LinkedIn and some of the other big sites like that. Okay, so use a mix of old and new school kind of resources. what are you, if you want to try to find out quickly about the community, what kind of sites could you look at to gather some quick information, or what kind of resources you look at? Does anybody have any ideas yet? Things, has anybody started to really try to get a handle of their community yet?
Yeah, I think for me, I've looked on like the Anne Arundel County government website just because like I'm familiar with the legislature, but not necessarily like the county itself. And so I think going there and looking through their resources and different organizations they have, like the Chamber of Commerce in the county, has been really helpful.
Okay. Has anybody else done any preliminary research for kind of government sites?
And Angel, I was just thinking, some of your political sources that you met maybe and have interacted with in the context of covering the political beat, politicians come out of the communities too, and they are all going to be plugged into neighborhoods and communities, particularly from the state legislature point of view. So sometimes you even go back to those relationships that you have created in the political realm and say, what can you tell me about this community or that community? I saw this happen down there and that happened. That's kind of weird. And that can be a springboard for you to, or for anybody, but we're talking, it can be a springboard for you to drill down a level lower and get to some grassroots reporting as well. Because that politician, the council people, the delegates, the senators, they're going to have contacts, good contacts in the communities.
Yeah, and of course, there's a presidential and congressional races and some other big races, but if there are local races in your area too, some of these folks who are running for office, you might just say, could you do a walk around with me and introduce me, tell me what's important about your community. I had some students I assigned profiles to do in one of the classes, and this was really, really helpful. Not only did they get a really good profile, but they found out a lot about, they actually did College Park, which is right next to campus, but they learned a lot more than they had previously, just randomly going out to cover stories. So getting an official or a police officer, somebody who's familiar with the turf really well, to do a walk around with you can be really, really helpful. And it's a way of introducing yourself to that official that's non-threatening too. You're asking kind of for help for you, even though you're going to learn a lot about them too. I always remind folks about census stuff because there's a lot of demographic info on the census that you can quickly plunge into just to get sort of a thumbnail look at information. And I just before I came on here, pulled down their quick facts page. Can you see this when I just switch to another page, or are you still seeing okay, good. So the quick facts page here, I had initially just asked for United States info in Maryland, and you could add another community here too. I'll just put Prince George's County for a minute. You could type in Baltimore. And so some of the information here that they had at the state level, they don't have yet for PG. But you get a quick look, like, who is here, just by doing a quick look through some census materials. So, you get a handle for PG County. If you just look at race, for instance, as a starting point, comparing white population PG versus in Maryland versus nationally, there's a big difference. And you see immediately we're a lot more, we have a lot more mixtures of different kinds of people here than they might in other communities. And in Baltimore, it's probably not that different. So you look at Asian and two races, Hispanic, and you get a sense of, okay, at least I know a little bit about, this is very baseline information, but it's more than I knew a minute ago before I pulled this up. It gives you housing facts. It gives you median incomes, which is usually, that can be real helpful too. You'll see that the median income in PG and Maryland is higher. Actually, it's the median housing units is higher here than it is for the country, right? If you think of a lot of rural areas, would be less expensive than living around here. But PG is less than the state as far as the median housing values. Household living arrangements, people per household, lots and lots and lots, and this is just on the quick facts page, and you can imagine if you were to drill through lots of other areas of the site, how much you could learn quickly about your city or county that you're covering, even to the point, let's see if they have income and poverty levels, median household income. PG is less than Maryland, but more than the US. So again, interesting for some quick information. And some info about businesses, minority-owned businesses, veterans, non-veterans. So very helpful. So I do recommend for whatever community you're covering that you take a quick look at quick facts for census stuff. Now I've got 20 zillion things coming up here. Let me go back. Okay. So when you look at that data, some of you have taken some data courses and multiple data courses, but you could get a lot of information. Just looking at info this year doesn't tell you as much. Perhaps if you compare it then to 5 years, 10 years, what's happening in the community, what's happening with the wealth, what's happening with the demographics. Do fewer or more people have access to things? One of the questions I believe is on internet access. So looking at trend lines for lots of data sets could be really helpful for sort of getting a portfolio or a real picture of the community that you're going to cover. So I do, if you're up for it and feel facile with this, it's some good data that you can actually run through. All these state governments have good manuals that you can plug into to get basic information as well. Delaware, we don't have any folks here today from Delaware as we did last summer, but Delaware has a good site. I can remember back when Maryland Manual was just a big fat book that we used to go through when we dumped into a beat, but it's all online. And so for really quick hits of lots of elected officials, including members of the legislature, judges, senators, House members, you can go to the Maryland Manual and they're all there on one site instead of having to hop around. Are you all familiar that it's an election year too, obviously, and if you're trying to figure out who your elected officials are for your new community that you're covering on the state site, you can pull up this link. I'll make sure that Rebecca has this, but on the State Board of Elections site, they do have a link as well, showing you can punch in an address or a zip code or a town and find out who the elected officials are for your community. So you don't feel, you feel like you have a little bit of information walking in, having done that research as well. You should have a sense we're in a big election year. How does the state, what are the voters like? Does anybody know in Maryland? And I know that our veterans know this, but the students, what's the party registration like in Maryland? Is it more Democratic, more Republican, or are we blue or red? Right, I'm gonna have to call on somebody. Kirsten, what's the registration like in Maryland?
Maryland is definitely a blue state.
And have you looked to see on the Board of Elections site what the actual data show?
I haven't looked at the actual data, but I just know generally we're mostly blue state, and a lot of the more rural areas in Western Maryland or the Eastern Shore can tend to lean more red in terms of their voter registration.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And it's funny, when I first got out of J school and started reporting in Maryland, it was 3-1 Democratic. It leaned 3-1. And now it's a little over 2-1 Democratic, but that's still a healthy, if you're Joe Biden, that sounds good to you, hearing that the state is 2-1. He's going to have less work to do than he might have in a different type of state. Let me pull up here for a real quick minute and show you this so you don't have to search through. Okay, so on the site, it's easy to access this. There's a navigation bar at the top of the Maryland State Board of Elections site, and you should become familiar with it. There's a lot of cool data in here. but they have something that just says registration statistics and allows you to drill down by year and by month to see the active voter registration totals for the state. And they've got removals down there. But so can you, I don't know how well you can read this chart and how good your glasses are. I'm squinting already. But so if they've got the Democrats and the Republicans here, and it shows that a little over 2.2 million active registered Democrats in Maryland, and compare that to about 994,000 Republicans. So, and they break it down when you were thinking about the counties and the cities, how different registration is in Baltimore. So for Baltimore City, let's see, we've got 296,000 Democrats registered versus about 28,000 Republicans. So about 10 to 1 Democratic. And I think PG isn't that different. PG about 454, 311 Democrats and 38,000 Republicans. So more than 10 to 1 Democratic. Versus if you were out on the Eastern Shore in Worcester County, let's see, Republicans are definitely in the lead here, about 19,500 registered Republicans versus 13,000 Democrats. So you can get a good sense of some important information this year just by looking at this particular chart and site. The election site will probably become your friend this summer.
And Christine, I wanted to add, this data is so important for daily reporting, deadline reporting, because as we saw last week on the primary day, we had a very small turnout in Baltimore. And so this is a paragraph, possibly two, and a reaction in your story that you're reporting in real time about what the percentage of voters that turned out and what their party, you've got your party affiliation because, you have to vote your party in the primary. And so this was very important last week as some analysis and also some context for what was happening out there at the polls and what we saw in the mayor's race here in Baltimore, which is really decides who wins because of the breakdown of voter, identity here. And it's such a Democratic city. So these are important figures. And then we have a big US Senate race this summer. And I'm sure you guys are going to be boots on the ground covering some of this. Maryland, they're hoping to turn it more into a purple state. And so this particular data set is going to be important for you guys to use this summer as you're reporting on the Also Brooks and Larry Hogan race, which is going to get pretty nasty.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be nasty and fun for reporting, I think. So guys, remember Hogan was a 2-time Republican governor, and he got in, I think, on the last day that he was able to register for the Senate race.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And Also Brooks is the county executive and former PG County State's attorney. So she's coming from a huge population base, huge Democratic base. And I think in the primary, some people thought she was going to lose, but she had the boots on the ground, as you say. She had turnout in districts where her opponent was expected, Montgomery County, where he was expected to win. She did really well there too. But she had the endorsements of Steny Hoyer and a lot of the top elected leaders. But it's going to be fascinating because Hogan surprised everybody when he first won election because he was running against the Democratic lieutenant governor, and a lot of the reporters thought the lieutenant governor was going to win. Hogan had no elected background. He was the son of Larry Hogan Sr. that he worked. I actually covered him when I was about 25 in PG County, and Hogan, the former governor, is my age, and we were like 25-year-olds, and he was helping his dad in PG County, and I just remember so vividly. He was nice and helpful, but he's a big Republican dude now with a lot of power. So the whole interplay on this is going to be fascinating.
It's a
Oh.
national story right here in Maryland. So if you can grab a piece of that story this summer, you're going to get a great experience at the wheel, and you can really learn a lot out there talking to voters, talking to community groups. So Christine, you're absolutely right. Good story.
Yeah. Yeah, I would try to grab a piece of it if I were you guys, if you could, because it is, why is it a national story? Do you know?
It's a national
No,
story
no, no.
because, oh,
Do
I'm
they
sorry.
know?
Okay, sorry.
Why is it a national story, guys? Do you know? What's the big deal about this seat? How close is if you look at the US Senate now, how many Democrats are there and how many Republicans?
If Larry Hogan were to win the seat, it would flip the Senate, I believe. And then
Yeah,
the Senate
it's
would
like
be
a seat
majority
or two, right?
Republican.
Different. So this is the focus of all the National Republican Party. And this Senate leader, Republican leader, recruited Larry to get into this race. They're very aware that he's got a lot of crossover appeal. He had a lot of even Democrats and independents vote for him to get his seat the first time. And I think and if you remember, do you remember during COVID what he did that other Republicans weren't doing? He was telling people to go get COVID shots, which, right, a lot of Republicans were saying they were wary of it. He was saying, don't worry about it, go get it. You're going to be better off getting it. And he was actually one of the few Republicans that were kind of bucking Trump on various things. So it's going to be a really interesting race. So try to get a piece of it and get read up a little bit if you can right now so that you know who the players are in that. The State Board of Election does have the results up, so you can do a search from the homepage again and look for the unofficial. They call them unofficial
Yeah.
because I guess some tallies still haven't come in from overseas, or maybe some were so close that they're still rechecking them. But
and
basically,
sorry, Christine.
yeah, go ahead.
The other thing is, in this race, I think it's going to be interesting to see whether race and gender trump political affiliation, and not to coin a particular former president's name, but it's really going to be interesting to see how the Black community turns out, whether women feel that having a woman, that was part of her, also Brooks's, campaign pitch during the primary, was to put the delegation needed more diversity on gender. So there are ways, if those are your interest or your passion, to get a piece of this, even if you're not covering politics generally.
Yeah, agreed.
I want
So
to
yeah,
add one thing too. I'm sorry.
yes.
This is
No,
this race is a master class for you guys, has potential to be, because talk about political donations, campaign donations. You're going to see money flying into the state from both parties. And it's going to be very fast, and it's going to be a lot. And so I suggest that you guys start noodling around on the campaign, the FEC campaign finance site, and just try to figure out deadline dates for filing reports, and also, just get a sense of how to work that, because that is a huge story, because this is going to be a very expensive campaign. Both sides want it really badly, so that equals a lot of dough that's going to be flowing into the state. And it's great for you guys as reporters, because you can really get your chops on this, earn your
yeah,
chops.
I agree. Following the money, you can find some fascinating stuff. It's fec.gov if you need to have a bookmark for that site. And you can look up the candidates by name, by district. It's really interesting. And again, if you're good with data, you can do a data dump down and do some sorts and find some fascinating stuff.
In
I-
here, MDDC a couple years ago did campaign finance sort of how-to videos. So I'll put the links to them. Now, granted, they're for Maryland, DC, and Delaware, but we had reporters who work with that content every day talk about how they mine for stories out of campaign finance reports and so forth. So the FEC, of course, is a different different animal, but some of those same themes come about. So I'll put those links in the chat.
Yeah, that's terrific. Even looking to see like, but you can do searches by zip code to see where the donations are coming from and to. You know, you can look and see if you've got somebody with a background with, you know, if you're looking for abortion money or gun money, for instance, which are two hot topics, look and see like where the NRA, where they're pumping their money and how much. And ask yourself questions of things you might want to know, and you can find a lot of it in the money. So yeah, getting ahead of that would be awesome for some story ideas. Okay.
I was going to say, you also want to be, and this will come up probably in the last session today, but you want to be sure that your editors know from day one what you're interested in. So if you know, if when you're talking about, gee, I'd like to cover zoning, or I'd like to cover the water and sewer board, oh, gee, I'd really like to have a piece of the political story. I'm really fascinated by this. Anything I can do to help, I'll be glad to be part of your team, and just kind of find out how that works. But the main way it works is your editor's not going to know what you're interested in unless you tell him so, or her. So be, you know, speak up. Don't hesitate to speak up if you want a piece of something. And the way you get that is by offering to do anything they need done. And then they're going to figure, well, this person is really a political junkie here, and well, let's get her close to the coverage.
Yeah. And one last thing on the election site, you can go back to 2016, 2020 and see county by county how areas voted in the presidential election. So that's often when we talk about a paragraph in a story or a couple of lines in a story, when you're doing B matter for a story that's breaking, sometimes you want to have that at your fingertips. You know, if they went in a different direction 4 years ago and it's a surprise this time.
You know, I would just add one thing, you know, election stories, you know, we're talking here a lot about data and money and numbers. And this girl here is not really a great numbers person, but what used to fascinate me, what I love to do is to go into communities and understand, why would you go for this person over that person? How do they respond to your needs? What do you want? So you can get good community stories and understand who's really going into that election booth and making the call and making the difference. So don't be put off, you know, by like the idea like, oh God, like going to the Board of Elections and going through all these finance reports, not my thing. Look at a different way to take a piece of this important race.
Yeah,
That's a great point, Ed. Great point.
It is a really good point. And even just hopefully you might get to do some profiles too, which is a thing that I used to love doing a lot of, and talking to people and finding out why they did certain things is always fascinating. So other stuff that you can find online, I don't know exactly what your beats are going to be, but some of you probably have already dug into this online search tool for getting information, quick information from the district courts, which are the lower courts in Maryland, and the circuit courts. And they also have searches for the appeals courts, which we have 2 in Annapolis. But you can log in here and search by either name or case number. You might remember about a year ago, we did a project that the second level reporting classes kind of all helped out, where we looked up every candidate for the local school board races and searched to see if any of them had cases pending. And not a surprise, several did. And Jerry Zremski's, one of his student reporters, went down to Southern Maryland and talked to somebody who was up to her chin in problems. And so sometimes when you start off and you want to just find out about somebody, especially if they're running for office and they've never run before, quick search through the court records can be helpful. The online search tool is moderately helpful. It'll let you, it'll return a little bit about a case. It doesn't give you the whole file. And so, but it'll tell you, well, this is in the circuit court and here's the case number. And what you can do is then go to that courthouse and talk to the clerk of the court and get the file and make some copies either with your phone or with Xeroxing or just notes that could turn into a story. So you don't have to be the court reporter to find the court information useful. We found a lot of the candidates a year ago were just, hadn't paid taxes, and they came up in the records. But some of the results were a little more serious.
Mhm.
So yeah, you don't have to run initially to every courthouse. We had looked, Alex Mann, who's an alum from our program, was working at the Annapolis Capitol, and he was covering this James Allen Varambek, who was involved in a murder case. And when we searched, we got a lot of stuff just seeing things that had popped up before the murder, and then some of the steps that had arisen, things that had been filed during his murder case. So having somebody who's prominent, you can kind of follow the trail and see how the links work there. Yeah, and Delaware obviously has a search tool too. So this is what I had from this slide, and I actually have another one. Let me just stop this share for a minute and see, before we go to another one, if we want to have any thoughts or questions from what we've talked about already, guys. Some of you have been more involved. DeMarco, anything useful there for what you're going to be covering, do you think?
For sure, I think definitely the politics side, like the spreadsheet you showed with the different like just information about your area. I'll definitely use that for sure. Because my beat, I haven't been specifically assigned a beat, but I kind of have an idea of what I'll be covering. Like I like more like entertainment, music, things and culture, that aspect. But they also told me like they want me to have a diverse portfolio by the end, so I'll be covering like a lot of different things. So I'll definitely use that for my advantage for
So maybe
sure.
you'll be doing some general assignment reporting, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Do any of the others of you want to do you have any advice for him on GA reporting and kind of you're parachuting in a lot to things completely new? I think you have to do a lot of quick research when you get a story cold that you have no background on, right? If you have time, even if it's an hour, to try to do some quick searches before you hit the ground, it'll be really helpful so that you're asking some intelligent questions when you get there. Anybody else had GA experience that you want to pipe in and give them some advice? No? All right.
Well, I would just say it was the best developmental tool I had as a rookie reporter for the Atlanta Constitution, because they put me on night general assignment, and that they're a morning paper. So what that meant was that I was on deadline probably 4 nights out of 5 during the week, covering a speech or covering a community meeting or whatever. And I would just cram like it was getting ready for a final before I went, and get as much information on whatever the topic of the and then so if it was a speaker and I knew the main theme of this,
You're fading in and out.
okay, he comes to Atlanta and he doesn't mention that topic at all. So sometimes what happens is that's newsworthy is something that doesn't happen, or something that isn't said, something that contradicts something said earlier, and you're not going to know that unless you have done as much research as you can before it happens. But it's a great challenge in terms of developing deadline writing skills.
I want to just piggyback. I couldn't see some of the questions in the chat when I had my screen covering it, my PowerPoint, but just attending things, even when you're not assigned to them, is really important too. Folks were mentioning civic groups, absolutely. But even let's say you're assigned to a city council or a town council, but you don't have, like, your editor's not saying you have to go that week to cover something. Just going to the meetings anyway and listening to the conversation and who's arguing with who all the time, you know, the folks up in the front of the room, do they get along? What are the dynamics? Are they fighting about things? What activists come forward to every hearing? Because I remember when I first started covering development in PG, there were a certain group of people that came to almost every development hearing they had. They were opposed to a lot of development in their residential areas, but they were great sources for information because they knew those neighborhoods really well and they knew the whole process better than I did when I first started. So just attending things to hear what's being said can sometimes help. The other thing, Alex Piles, who covered the State House here for us for a while, talked about when he first parachuted, I think it was when he was at the Daily Record, Tom, into the
Right.
State House cold, and he had worked in my bureau as a GA reporter when he was here, so he didn't have the State House experience, but he positioned himself all the time next to the AP reporter and other people who knew the beat, and the Capitol reporter and the Sun reporters, I'm sure, and just said, you know, how'd you get him to talk to you? And I can't get the speaker. What do you do to get the speaker? And I think it was one of the Annapolis Capitol reporters said to him, oh, you can get the speaker. You just got to be there at 8 o'clock when he comes in and he parks on the circle and you walk in with him. So your competitors are often so helpful because you're all people first and they can give you tips. You know, if it's not something that it's an investigative project they're working on, usually they'll be helpful with how to find things too. So mind those competitors to your advantage too. They can be really helpful. Okay, so I have another little one and I'll probably just do about 10 minutes with this. So we have a couple minutes towards the end for any other questions that pop up. But this one, some of you might have had some power searching talks in some earlier classes, but I know some of you haven't. So let me just share again here. All right, so I'm just talking about power searching with advanced Google search. When you want to make sure that you're going to stuff that's useful and figuring out if a page is going to be helpful or is it junk or a hoax site, basically. One URL to be aware of is just this domain publisher. When you want to put pages up on the internet, there are directories that help that folks pay to have these sites put up, and you can search to find information about the people who have internet sites. And so I don't know if I'm taking up your whole screen, but if you have room, do you have room to do some work in a browser for a minute, guys? Am I taking up, can you get a browser to the side of my PowerPoint for a minute? Is that a yes? What I want you to do is to type in this whois.com/whois. And I'm actually going to pull it up too. I just want you to see what you can get from it. So it'll take you to a home page. And you can do domain lookups. If let's say you're at a site and you're trying to figure out who's running this thing. We're going to look at something that I know the answer to, but you can get the sense of what's available on these sites. Just type in WashingtonPost.com in the box there on your screen. And because the Post does have an internet site, WashingtonPost.com, you can get some details, including contact information here. You know, most good sites have an About Us page linked from the home page and contact information linked from the home page, but some it's not so easy to find. So it might be just as easy to do a quick domain search and see if you can get some contact info. It tells you interesting stuff, even, you know, when they had last updates on their on this account, when they have to renew their account. Looks like the Post has to renew this November. They first purchased it, I think, in November of '95. They went online in summer of '96, and I was actually at the Post at that time. It was pretty cool to be there for the launch. But You'll see they have the address here for this site. They have phone numbers, even a fax number, which probably isn't used too much anymore, administrative contacts, technical contacts, and then some other raw data, some URLs here. So we know who publishes the post, most of us, but if it was a site that you didn't know a lot about, this could at least give you some back phone numbers, some ways to reach out to somebody to see, you know, to put a call out and say, who are you? What's your background? You know, what's up with this site? So knowing how to reach somebody at a site that where it's not obvious is useful. Just being aware too of what the domains mean and what that means as far as whether or not there might be valuable information on the site is something good to know. So by the domain, we mean that the URL, the web address before the first single slash. So some common endings for big kinds of sites, .gov, which is, it's more than the US government. There are also state, county, and municipal sites that use .gov. .mil is operated by the Defense Department. It's only, the only folks who can publish to that are US military, arms of the US military. .edu, you're all familiar with, coming from universities where you've had these accounts with .edu, but it's colleges and universities, and particularly the libraries, the professors who are specialists on certain topics would be useful on those sites. .com and .org, I think, are the most misunderstood of these kind of top 5 domains. .com was initially intended to be for profit businesses, but you or I, we can all publish it. We can all buy, you know, you plunk down 30, 40 bucks a year and you can create and launch a .com site. I could be chrisharvey.com, right? So it doesn't really tell you as much about who might be manning that site as some of the other ones would. And same with .org. It was initially intended for nonprofits, but currently all of us could buy something ending in .org if we wanted to have our own homepage up. But at least with .gov, .mil, .edu, you're aware of sort of who has control of it. I'm not saying that they're perfect. It's analogous. If something's on .gov, if there's a press release there, it would be analogous to being handed a sheet of paper with that information on it if you went to a press conference for the agency. So unless they're hacked, you know, at least it's coming from that agency or that official with the government. Take it with a grain of salt, right? Sometimes things coming from official sources aren't always the best information, but oftentimes you can get really useful information there. So having that little bit of knowledge can be helpful. Skip on past a couple of these. Hopefully you're looking to see too, if it looks unprofessional, it probably is, right? If it's filled with typos, it's probably not being run by a professional. I always look immediately in the bottom or the top of the navigation bars for the contact and about us pages, because I expect really professional sites to have that at the reader's fingertips. So that's another kind of positive bit of information if you see that right away. What do you consider as far as Wikipedia? How useful is it for you when you're trying to background something? How do you use it, or do you use it? Anybody?
I think it can be helpful for like, excuse me, for basic information, as long as like you go back and fact check that somewhere else. Like it's easy to, it'll help you like easily find basic information about something, like everything you'll fact check, but then also the sources at the bottom, a lot of things are like linked with like a bibliography, and so not necessarily for journalism I use it, but for other things, and I think it would be just as helpful in the journalism context as well.
Yeah, I think we'd all be probably less than truthful if we said that we never looked at it, right? It usually comes up at the top of a web search, and like you said, the source. The footnotes at the bottom are usually to primary sources or very reliable sources that could be a starting point for some research. So you're not going to quote Wikipedia, but you could use it for some information. The other thing is working with student sites or nonprofit sites is there are obviously photos published on Wikipedia, and there are a couple of types of photos that you can actually use for republication. So if it says on the photo, if you're looking at an image and it says it's public domain, that means there's no copyright attached. And there are a fair amount of federal government images, like if you were doing something with a disease or a germ or something, the CDC site or the NIH sites might have an image that you could use if it's public domain. There's a lot of Creative Commons images on Wikipedia and on some of these large sites. And that just means you need to read the fine print there, because usually with Creative Commons, there are some restrictions. They often allow it for nonprofit publications, but usually with some strings attached. Usually they'll say you can use it if you cite the photographer and link to the original page where this was published. But I know running CNS for a while where we had no budget for anything, it was helpful, and I'm exaggerating, small budget, but it was helpful to have some sites where we could pull up photos or images, especially with stories about diseases or bugs, critters, and use for low or no money. So it can be helpful that way. Have any of you used Wayback Machine? Okay, let's go ahead, and I'm going to push this to the side and go to a browser. Push me to a side on your screen, minimize me for a minute, and go ahead into your browser and type in Wayback Machine. I want you to take a look there. I'm going to just get rid of something on the end here. Mine's moving super slow. And it wasn't .com. Sorry guys, I'm getting a little spastic here with my typing. All right. So hopefully you were quicker at this than I was getting it up. So the Wayback Machine is an internet archive, and it's archived a whole heck of a lot of pages from sites, global sites, going back in time. And it can be helpful because a lot of sites now, if they're professional news sites, they're often, you pay to go on. There's a firewall, but they've archived pages, and sometimes you want to go back historically and look and see what was published on this day and how did it look, right? So an easy example is go ahead and type in, there was a box here for URL, type in CNN.com. And once you get it, I want you to go back on the calendar to 2001, and you probably know where I'm going with this now. And go, once you get 2001 up on the calendar here, go to September 11th. And then click on, you'll see from CNN, it's saying there's 45 snapshots of the homepage from that day. I'm just going to click on one of the snapshots, and if you want to click as well. It's moving really slow, probably because we're all clicking. It's shocking to go back and look at home pages from 20-something years ago because they look so different. But so let me just pull this down a little bit for you. This was the CNN homepage at 4:33 p.m. on September 11th, 2001, on the day of the terrorist attack. Why might this be useful? Being able to go back and look at a news page from a certain day.
I feel like not only can we see like the information at the time and like what happened historically, but I feel like it's also useful because we can see like how they reported it at the time, or like what knowledge that they knew at the time that you know, we might know knowledge now in the future that they didn't know back then. So it's interesting to see like what they knew at the time and just how they reported that.
Yeah, and actually the links work, which is wonderful. So the links to the stories. So again, these might be behind a firewall at this point, maybe not for CNN, but if it were the Washington Post or somewhere where you're paying for your subscription. So you can get at the stories. You can see what looks really different about this homepage than today when you look at a homepage. There's a couple things here.
There's less interactive elements.
Yeah. So there's one image on this homepage and it's tiny. It only goes that far. And do you know why there might be fewer images that day? There were in general, I'll tell you, because a lot of the modems were slower and pulling up video was a lot slower than now. But there was a bigger reason why this page is so bare. So all the major sites, the Post, the New York Times, CNN, when the planes hit the towers, everybody was trying to get on these sites to see what the heck was happening, right? I was literally in our news lab in our old journalism building. My class was coming in at 9 at the time the first plane was hitting. I had the TV on and it was a multimedia class. And I said, all right, go to these sites and let's see what they're saying. And we tried to go to the Post and already they had crashed because so many people were hitting it at the same time. What a lot of the sites did is they stripped their homepage. They took the graphics, the visuals off so it would load faster and stop crashing. And I'm sure that CNN did the same thing that the Post did at the time. But so it's useful. So if you were somebody talking about design and how it's changed, you can see how different the design is, right? From that perspective. Where's the navigation bar on this page from the 2001? And this was typical.
It's on the left.
It's on the left. And where are they now? The main navigation bars.
Usually at the top.
Yep. And why did they switch, do you think? Why did they all move it? Because they did. They did tracking studies. They had people put nodes on their heads and they watched and tracked how they read the page. And they realized, oh, they're all looking left to right, just as we read on a printed paper. But the fascinating thing was that people were reading left to right at the top all the way across. And then as they went lower on the page, they went less and less to the right, like it was an F with littler and littler and littler arms. But so they moved the navigation bar so it would be at the top and people would like look across and read the bar there. But for me as a reporter, what would be useful here is the stories and the layout and how they played it. And if I was going to do, there have been a lot of commemorative stories. Most anniversary, there are stories in news publications about 9/11, and sometimes going back to some of the early stories, either for ideas or for information. You can use this Wayback Machine to get some stuff quickly. So it's something to keep in mind for reporting, and certainly for media writers to be able to talk about how publication has changed and how they've done projects in the past is useful too. So hardly recommend it. How many of you have used Google Scholar to find information for stories or for research? Most of you? All right, so I won't spend too much time with that other than to say what's really useful is you can find not only articles that were written by folks, but case law that they've been, so articles written about them and case law that they've been a writer of, you know, that they fashioned the opinion. And below that, it's got, it links to who else is using the site, how much it's been shared. And so you get a really good idea of how useful it is to other people, which means it's probably a pretty good bit of information that would be valuable to you, right? If nobody else is using it or linking to it, I'd be a little worried about it. But so Google Scholar can help you with deeper searches. If you haven't used advanced Google search, you should start using it. And you can do some advanced searches without going to advanced Google search, just by using some operator terms. So for instance, go ahead in your browser real quick, and I know we're getting near end time, so we'll end with a couple of searches here. But if you've got, go ahead and pull up Google. And without even going into advanced search, if you're in just the Google search box here, the regular old Google, and you wanted to look for either a specific kind of site or a specific site or a specific kind of file, you can add these little operators to your search terms to quickly find the kinds of site you want. So we've had into school here a guy who used to be the Google happiness guy. He helped people find things easily on Google, and he had a lot of tips. And one of them was, you know, I normally would just, if I wanted to find stuff on Donald Trump and the criminal trial, I probably would just go ahead and type in Donald Trump and criminal trial in quotation marks. But he said a lot of times using their site colon and then saying what site you want to go to is quicker and easier than just typing it into or just using the algorithm on that particular website. So if you typed in now in just this regular Google search box, I'm going to type in Donald Trump criminal trial, and the operator is site colon.cnn. I want to see only what CNN has about this trial, and we'll see how, what did I do wrong here? Goodness, try one more time. I just did this before I came in, so I mistyped something. You can do it on yours while I'm typing on mine too, and maybe you're a cleaner typer. Okay, I think I did .com the first time instead of CNN. And you're only going to get returns for CNN. If you wanted to see CNN coverage on Trump and his trial, this is probably one of the fastest ways to do it. So it's a handy little, just using that one little operator can really narrow the search quickly for you. You can also narrow, if you, let's say you wanted to do some research on Vladimir Putin and you don't want all these sort of non-essential site bits of information coming up, you can use site.gov for gov. We talked about .gov being one of the main domains for internet searches. So I'm going to type this in. And what do you think will come up if we type in Vladimir Putin's site :gov? What kind of sites are going to come up quickly at the top of the returns from the Google search? What would you guess? So .gov is only what? So it's government sites, probably a lot of US government site. It's all from the US and federal, state, but I'm guessing some federal sites. What sites do you think will come up at the top of that return? Government. Let's see. So I wasn't expecting Senate.gov to be the first return. I was thinking maybe White House or State Department. But so the first I got something from the Senate, and then I got something from Archives, a US Mission, US Embassy, Senate. So it's a little not quite what I was expecting, but they are all government sites, which is good for finding reliable information. A lot of congressmen are posting stuff, Congress Cohen and Wilson. So you can see how much narrower this is than if you had just typed in Vladimir Putin, right? You would have gotten a lot of commercial sites, things that were probably less valuable if you're doing research and reporting. And you can also search by the types of files. So you could have done file type.pdf :pdf to find PDFs. You can search for spreadsheets, etc. But so I recommend, because I know we're at time, having this handy, or just do a quick search into Google Advanced Search without even knowing the URL, and you'll see how you can narrow things quickly there without knowing the site operator terms. So they give you, instead of you having, it's sort of like, instead of having to know the code behind a web page, instead of you having to know the site operator terms, they have them embedded here in their search boxes. So I always do a dog search because they're cute for starters. So I used to have, until last year, I had a little wire-haired terrier for 14 years. He passed away last year. So I'm just going to type in, well, I'll type, I now have a Westie. So West Highland Terrier, and any language. I looked yesterday and I narrowed it to the UK because these little terriers are from the UK. So I'm narrowing it by where the information's coming from. You can narrow it for time references, past day, past week, month, year. I'm just going to say anytime. You could say here, I want it to be this domain or this kind of site. And then if you were looking for images to post on your site, you could say, I want it to be free to use, share, modify, even commercially. So that's probably public domain there. So I'll put that up. Well, that'll be too limiting. I'm not going to say that. Let's just say any format, and then hit search. And then you get a bunch of stuff here. So the narrowing is really quick with advanced search, and you can really use it to find useful stuff and not just dog pictures or things about dogs, or I'm not sure why these things are coming up, but these are the dogs here. I think we're at time, right, Rebecca? So yeah. I'll leave it there. I have some more stuff on here, including photo image searches and reverse searches, so that you can try to figure out, is this really what it purports to be online? And I'll get a PDF to Rebecca. I had it, I think, in just PowerPoint format. I'll send you a PDF when I get off so that you can share that with them. Because having a few of these quick tips at your fingertips can be helpful in a big rush. Thank you guys for letting me bend your ear for a while. And thank you for contributing to the conversation. I hope you have a really good time at your, I know you will, you're going to have a fascinating time probably at your internship jobs this summer.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Chris, for sharing your knowledge.